Imagine if everything we thought we knew about our European ancestors was completely upside down. For over a century, the prevailing narrative in anthropology painted a picture of modern humans sweeping across the globe, replacing our more primitive cousins, the Neanderthals. But as genetic research gets incredibly sophisticated and new tech allows us to re-examine ancient fossils, a truly fascinating and, dare I say, controversial theory is emerging. What if modern Europeans, especially those of us in the far north, the Balts, Finns, and Scandinavians, aren't just distant relatives of Neanderthals? What if we're actually their direct descendants? Could Europeans truly be the inheritors of the Neanderthal legacy? This isn't just some wild idea to get clicks. It might actually be closer to the truth than a lot of scientists are comfortable admitting. Take skull studies, for instance. They show that prominent brow ridges are particularly well developed in Swedes, Finns, and Estonians. Let's dive into the facts. The average European carries between 1.5% and 2.5% Neanderthal DNA, but that figure only tells a tiny part of the story. The amount of DNA isn't as crucial as what that DNA actually does. In Europeans, particularly in northern populations, the Neanderthal influence pops up in highly visible and biologically significant traits. Pale skin, red or blonde hair, straight or wavy hair textures, green and blue eyes, and even certain immune system strengths. We're also talking about psychological traits like heightened vigilance, sensitivity to pain, and a tendency to be a bit more socially reserved. Many of these characteristics are far more common in Baltic and Finnish populations than in Southern Europeans or those from the Middle East. For example, gene variants linked to light skin pigmentation, such as SLC24A5 and SLC45A2, and eye color variants like HERC2 and OCA2 have been directly traced back to archaic introgression. Essentially, they were inherited from Neanderthals. These specific features are concentrated heavily in Northern Europe and are almost non-existent elsewhere in the world. So why is that the case? The answer might lie in ancient interbreeding, not just a few isolated instances, but continuous, deep hybridization between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals stretching back tens of thousands of years. And perhaps, in Europe, it wasn't Homo sapiens who conquered the Neanderthals, but rather the Neanderthals who assimilated sapiens and evolved. For decades, textbooks told us that Neanderthals simply vanished around 40,000 years ago, completely replaced by modern humans. But that neat, tidy story simply doesn't hold up anymore. The fossil record across Europe clearly shows extensive overlap between early Homo sapiens and Neanderthals. In fact, at sites like Grotto Mandrin in France, there's evidence that the two groups actually alternated occupation over generations, possibly even centuries. At Mandrin, a modern human tooth was discovered sandwiched between Neanderthal layers, dating back over 50,000 years ago. This really suggests coexistence, not conquest. While the Grotto Mandrin Neanderthals, who were among the most ancient, eventually disappeared, other Neanderthal populations, especially in more secluded or isolated parts of Europe, survived for longer. They left behind fossils that show distinct differences from the earlier groups. Take, for instance, La Ferracie and La Chapelle-aux-Saints. These individuals are traditionally labeled Neanderthals, but they really don't fit the brutish stereotype we've been fed. Yes, they were tall, heavy-browed, and robust, but they also exhibited signs of complex behaviors, deliberate burial, sophisticated tool use, and even the potential for speech. Some anthropologists are now putting forward the argument that these later Neanderthals were actually hybrids, and if they were hybrids, they weren't dead ends in our evolutionary tree. They were our ancestors. Let's take a closer look at some of these incredible fossils. La Chapelle-aux-Saints 1, a nearly complete skeleton found in southwestern France in 1908, was for years wrongly depicted as stooped and ape-like. In reality, his posture was due to arthritis, and it's highly likely the man walked upright. He had a remarkably large brain, about 1,720 cubic centimeters, significantly larger than the modern human average, and a powerful physique. La Pharisee I, another Neanderthal male discovered in France, was carefully buried in a stone-lined pit. His teeth and skull display a fascinating blend of Neanderthal robustness and more modern traits, such as reduced prognathism, less projecting jaw, and a higher cranial vault. His brain size was also enormous, around 1,600 soci. What makes these individuals so incredibly important is their age, roughly 60,000 to 40,000 years ago. These weren't archaic Neanderthals like those found at Cima de los Huesos in Spain or Krapina in Croatia. They lived during the very same period when early modern humans were entering Europe. If interbreeding truly happened, these individuals were very likely the direct result. And if anyone managed to survive the immense upheaval of climate change, volcanic winters, and diseases that followed, it was them. It's entirely possible, even probable, that the ancestors of modern Northern Europeans are descended from these very hybrids. Their genetic legacy, tall, strong, pale-skinned, light-eyed, is still clearly visible in the DNA of Baltic peoples, Finns, Scandinavians, and some Slavs. The Romans even wrote about the Finns, describing them as living in a state of astonishing savagery. Their food was wild herbs, their clothing animal skins, their arrowheads made of bone, and even their children and elders had no other protection from the weather than wattle huts. As late as the 11th century, the so-called Jotuni, the most ancient population of Scandinavia, lived in the mountains and forests, clad in animal skins and uttering sounds more akin to the cries of wild beasts than human speech. But genes don't lie. Genetics has opened up a whole new window into our past, and it's revealing just how deep the Neanderthal roots go in Northern Europe. A key example is the BNC2 gene, which is associated with freckling and skin pigmentation. It's strongly linked to Neanderthal DNA and is very common in Northern Europeans. Another is the POU2F3 gene, which influences hair texture, again, a Neanderthal contribution. Even the MC1R gene, famously responsible for red hair, seems to have an archaic origin. These traits are rare or completely absent outside of Europe, but there's more. This pattern suggests something truly striking. Neanderthal genes weren't just diluted out over time. They were selected for in the cold, dark environment of Ice Age Europe. Pale skin was incredibly helpful for absorbing vitamin D in low sunlight conditions. Stronger immune systems would have helped resist cold weather infections, and robust bodies were essential for enduring the bitter cold and hunting large game. In other words, Northern Europeans may not just carry Neanderthal DNA, they may have thrived because of it. Among Europeans, certain populations really stand out. Genetic studies consistently show that Finns and Baltic peoples, Latvians, Lithuanians, Estonians, are genetic outliers. They carry unique gene variants not widely shared even with other Europeans. Some of this is due to historical isolation, but some of it might be much deeper, a remnant of Ice Age survival and ancient ancestry. Finns, in particular, show high frequencies of Neanderthal-derived traits and also have elevated proportions of Uralic-specific and archaic genetic components. Their mitochondrial haplogroups, such as U5 and V, are among the oldest in Europe and are also found in ancient hunter-gatherers who lived during and shortly after the Ice Age. These weren't recent arrivals from the south, they were Ice Age survivors. Some geneticists have even noted that the Finnic peoples carry unique sequences that may not just come from Neanderthals, but from hybrids who evolved separately in northern refugia during the coldest periods of the Pleistocene. In other words, they may be among the least admixed modern humans in Europe, not the most. Rather than being pure Homo sapiens, they might actually be more Neanderthal than anyone else alive. Picture a frostbitten Europe, where Neanderthals, with their rugged faces and sturdy bodies, roamed for nearly 400,000 years, perfectly adapted to a world of ice and shadow. Now, imagine early modern humans encountering these natives in a dance of survival and intimacy, their unions forging a new kind of human, hybrids who carried the best of both worlds. Fast forward to today, and Northern Europeans, especially Finns and Baltic peoples, clearly stand out with their pale skin, blue eyes, and robust builds, traits that powerfully echo those ancient hybrids. In this view, Europeans, particularly Northern Europeans like the Finns and Balts, are direct descendants of Neanderthal Homo sapiens hybrids. These are individuals like those represented by fossils such as La Chapelle-aux-Saints and La Ferracie, dating back to around 60,000 years ago. These hybrids, unlike archaic Neanderthals such as the Grotta-Mandren population that went extinct, laid the very foundation for modern Europeans. Their unique genetic phenotypes were preserved in Europe's cold, isolated north. Through genetic, fossil, and environmental evidence, we can uncover a deep ancestry that truly ties Europeans to these early hybrids, challenging the idea that their heritage is merely a recent footnote in human history. Neanderthals weren't just Europe's first residents. They were its very soul. For nearly 400,000 years, from about 400,000 to 40,000 years ago, they thrived in a brutal landscape of glaciers and tundra. They hunted bison with stone-tipped spears and huddled in caves to survive bitter winters. Their bodies were perfectly built for this world. Light skin to capture scarce sunlight, broad noses to warm icy air, and stocky frames to conserve heat. But around 100,000 years ago, something truly remarkable happened. Early modern humans began appearing in Neanderthal territories, possibly during the warm, last interglacial period. Instead of clashing, they mingled, creating hybrid offspring who carried both Neanderthal and Homo sapiens traits. These hybrids, represented by fossils like La Chapelle-aux-Saints and La Ferracie, weren't just a fleeting experiment. They became the ancestors of modern Europeans, their genes shaping the very features that define Northern Europeans today. Meanwhile, archaic Neanderthals, like the isolated Grotta-Mandren population, left no lasting mark. Their lineages simply faded into extinction. Let's explore how these hybrids, not the archaic holdouts, forged a 100,000-year legacy for Europeans. The bones of Europe tell a story of blending, not replacement. Later Neanderthals, dated between 70,000 and 40,000 years ago, show clear signs of Homo sapiens influence, strongly suggesting they were hybrids. These fossils stand in sharp contrast to archaic Neanderthals like the Grotta-Mandren individual known as Thorin, who remained genetically pure, but ultimately vanished. Europe's geography acts as a natural vault, with oceans to the west and south, Arctic ice to the north, and mountains like the Alps splitting the interior. During glacial periods, immense ice sheets transformed northern Europe into a veritable fortress, effectively isolating populations. Finns, in their northeastern corner, and Balts, surrounded by dense seasonal forests, were particularly cut off. Their genes were preserved like precious relics. This isolation was absolutely key. When Homo sapiens interbred with Neanderthals, their hybrid descendants in Europe faced less mixing than in Asia, where migrations across vast plains diluted Neanderthal genes. Finns, with their history of genetic bottlenecks, concentrated these Neanderthal alleles. Balts, similarly isolated, exhibit a high expression of Neanderthal traits, their wide faces being a direct testament to this seclusion. Europe's north, especially Finland and the Baltics, served as a genetic time capsule for these hybrid traits. The fossil record itself is like a family album, showing how Neanderthal Homo sapiens hybrids gradually became modern Europeans. Early hybrids, such as the Skål and Kavse individuals from 120,000 to 90,000 years ago, were Homo sapiens with Neanderthal-like robusticity, strongly suggesting interbreeding in the Levant during the last interglacial period. These hybrids likely moved into Europe, where later Neanderthals like La Chapelle and La Ferracie, dating back 50,000 years, show more Homo sapiens-like traits. Higher foreheads, smaller noses, hinting at their mixed blood. Compare this to Thorin from Grotta Mandrin, a pure Neanderthal from the same period. Thorin's inbred genome and classic Neanderthal skull, devoid of any modern traits, clearly show a lineage that didn't mix and ultimately didn't survive. Vindijia and Saint-Césaire, on the other hand, have rounder skulls and more Homo sapiens-like features, with Vindigia's DNA even revealing Homo sapiens alleles. The Oase 1 fossil from 40,000 years ago, a Homo sapiens with 6 to 9% Neanderthal DNA, truly seals the deal. Its robust jaw strongly echoes Neanderthal ancestry. These fossils trace a 100,000-year chain from early hybrids in the Levant to late Neanderthal hybrids in Europe, culminating in modern Europeans. Finns and Balts, with their distinctive Neanderthal-like phenotypes, are the end point of this journey. Their traits are a direct legacy of hybrids like La Chapelle, not extinct archaics like Thorin. Some academics claim that European traits like light skin and blue eyes are relatively recent, emerging only 10,000, 5,000 years ago with the advent of farming or post-glacial shifts. This narrative, often seen in popular media, suggests Europeans are newcomers to their own features rather than ancient descendants. However, the evidence tells a completely different story, one deeply rooted in Neanderthal hybrids. Neanderthals themselves had light skin and variable hair and eye colors as evidenced by MC1R and OCA2 variants found in their fossils. The SLC24A5 gene, which is almost universally present in Finns, has clear Neanderthal roots and appeared in European hunter-gatherers as far back as 20,000 years ago. Genes for blue eyes show up in similar ancient DNA, directly tied to Neanderthal ancestry from interbreeding around 50,000 years ago. These traits, carried by hybrid ancestors like La Ferracie, were refined over 100,000 years, not simply born yesterday. The recent story tends to focus on Neolithic gene sweeps, but it completely ignores the fundamental Neanderthal baseline. Hybrids from 100,000 years ago brought these alleles to Europe, and Northern Europe's climate kept them dominant. Finns and Balts, with their Arctic isolation, perfectly preserved this legacy. Their pale faces are a direct link to hybrid Neanderthals, not just a recent genetic fluke. Finns and Baltic peoples, Estonians, Latvians, Lithuanians, are truly the most direct descendants of Neanderthal hybrids. Their subarctic homelands, with their brutal winters and dim sunlight, perfectly mirror the Neanderthal world, naturally favoring traits like light skin and stocky builds. Finland's genetic history, marked by population bottlenecks, amplified these Neanderthal alleles. Balts, isolated by seas and forests, show similar patterns. Their wide faces and fair skin are clear hallmarks of their hybrid heritage. Southern Europeans, like Italians, typically have darker skin and slimmer builds, traits diluted by Mediterranean climates and subsequent Neolithic migrations. Eastern Europeans, like Russians, show some Neanderthal traits, but their lineage was more mixed with steppe nomads. Finns and Balts, in their frozen north, stayed closest to the hybrid blueprint. Their very bodies are a living echo of La Chapelle and La Ferracie. Skeptics might argue that the amount of Neanderthal DNA in modern Europeans is too small to claim direct descent. However, it's not about quantity. These specific alleles shape key traits like light skin and robust faces that distinctly define Finns and Balts. It's like a pinch of spice transforming an entire dish. Others claim Homo sapiens' African origin overshadows any Neanderthal ancestry. True, but hybrids like La Ferracie added a distinct European layer, making Finns and Balts different from their African roots. Some argue Neanderthals simply went extinct, not ancestral, but hybrids didn't. They merged, as fossils like Vindija clearly show their genes living on in every European. Finally, the recent trait narrative completely falls apart when you see Neanderthal alleles and 100,000-year-old hybrids carried forward by fins and Balts in an unbroken line. This isn't just science. It's about identity. For 100,000 years, from the last interglacial period to today, Europe has been home to Neanderthal, Homo sapiens hybrids. Their legacy is etched into the very faces of Finns and Balts: light skin, blonde hair, blue eyes, broad faces, and stocky builds. These are the gifts of ancestors like La Chapelle, perfectly preserved in a land of ice and shadow. Archaic Neanderthals like Thorin faded, but hybrids thrived, their descendants shaping Europe's story. Northern Europeans carry this heritage in every step through snowy forests, their features a living bridge to a 100,000-year-old past. Recognizing this deep ancestry isn't just about history, it's about honoring a people forged by the cold, bound to their continent by the very blood of their hybrid kin. From the warm caves of the last interglacial to the icy streets of modern Tallinn, a 100,000-year thread ties Europeans to their Neanderthal hybrid ancestors. Northern Europeans, especially Finns and Balts, are the descendants of these hybrids. Individuals like La Chapelle and La Ferracie, whose light skin, robust faces, and stocky builds live on in their genes. Genetic evidence consistently confirms this, showing Neanderthal alleles powerfully shaping Northern European phenotypes. Fossil records trace a clear hybrid lineage from 100,000 years ago, unlike the extinct archaic Neanderthals like Thorin's Grotta Mandrin group. Europe's cold north and isolation uniquely preserved these traits, making Finns and Balts the truest heirs. This deep ancestry profoundly challenges superficial narratives, affirming a European identity rooted in the ancient unions of Neanderthals and Homo sapiens. So, if the Neanderthal bloodline truly survived in the north, what happened in the south? Why did early Neanderthal populations like those at Grotta Mandrin simply vanish? The answer may well lie in geography, climate, and direct contact. Southern Neanderthals were among the very first to encounter migrating Homo sapiens from the Levant. These sapiens populations had evolved under different pressures in warmer climates, with different pathogens and diets. When they arrived in Europe, they brought not only cultural innovations like blade tools and symbolic behavior, but also new diseases and increased competition for resources. Mandrin and other southern Neanderthals were caught at a crucial crossroads. They may have been outcompeted in some areas or succumbed to infections. However, those in more remote northern regions had the time and space to adapt. They may have interbred with early sapiens before the southern extinction wave even began, and then retreated into the deep forests, mountains, and tundra. By the time the last glaciers retreated, it was their descendants who re-emerged. This theory fundamentally challenges the idea that Homo sapiens simply replaced everyone else. Instead, it suggests that in places like Europe, the dominant force wasn't replacement. It was mixture, hybrid vigor, and ultimately, survival. To recap, the idea that modern Europeans are the result of Neanderthal, sapiens hybrids, especially from lineages like La Ferracie and La Chapelle, helps explain so many enduring mysteries. It explains why Europeans differ so much in appearance from populations in Africa and East Asia. It explains why the oldest European genomes, like those from Kostenki, Songhir, and Goyet, already show signs of Neanderthal ancestry that shaped key phenotypes. And it explains why so many Ice Age fossils don't look purely modern, but instead show strong archaic features. Thick brow ridges, large noses, and robust jaws. Even today, these traits persist, not in everyone, but more often in Northern Europe. The wide nasal bridges, strong jawlines, thick skull bones, and deep-set eyes seen in many Balts, Scandinavians, and Finns aren't just random variation, they're ancestral echoes. For decades, Neanderthals were portrayed as slow, dim-witted, and ultimately doomed. But that image is changing rapidly. We now know they made jewelry, used fire, buried their dead, and perhaps even sang or used language. In many ways, they weren't very different from early modern humans. But what if they didn't go extinct at all? What if they became us, especially in northern Europe? The line between Homo sapiens and Homo neanderthalensis may not be a line at all. It may be a deep, tangled root system, a blend of species, cultures, and adaptations that gave rise to something entirely new. It wasn't replacement. It was a profound merging. But why does all of this matter? Because science should be based on evidence, not ideology. By acknowledging the true diversity of Neanderthals and their profound contributions to modern humans, we gain a clearer and far more accurate picture of our past. The Neanderthal legacy isn't one of extinction, but of integration, adaptation, and survival. And that, truly, is a story worth telling. Indeed, the ancient blood that runs through these distant ancestors has more in common with us than we once thought possible. Genetic studies have consistently shown that Neanderthals carried alleles for light eye color, particularly blue eyes. The OCA2 gene, which is critical in melanin production in the iris, contains Neanderthal variants that have been linked to lighter pigmentation in modern Europeans. One allele associated with blue eye color has been found in European and Central Asian hunter-gatherers dating back at least 30,000 years. According to one frequently cited report, blue eye color in humans may be caused by a perfectly associated founder mutation in a regulatory element located within the HERC2 gene that inhibits OCA2 expression. This mutation for light-colored eyes most likely originated in the Caucasus region around 42,000 years ago. This perfectly overlaps with a recent study that found modern humans and Neanderthals overlapped and interbred in that very region between 47,000 years ago and lasting nearly 7,000 years until the Neanderthals went extinct. Think about that. 7,000 years of interbreeding and genetic mixing. So why does the myth persist that Neanderthals couldn't have had blue eyes? This claim is based on outdated or selective genetic studies that ignore newer evidence from ancient DNA. Institutions that support the replacement hypothesis often emphasize findings that reinforce the idea of a homogeneous Neanderthal ancestry, while downplaying studies showing early genetic variation. The widespread presence of these genetic traits in modern humans strongly implies that they were advantageous and selected for in northern latitudes, where lighter hair and skin provided clear benefits in vitamin D synthesis. The idea that Neanderthals only had dark hair is not only scientifically inaccurate, but also arguably a politically motivated narrative designed to minimize their contributions to modern European populations. The claim that Neanderthals did not have light pigmentation is another distortion of the genetic evidence. While early Homo sapiens arriving from more tropical locales had darker skin, Neanderthals had already been adapting to European environments for over 300,000 years. The need for efficient vitamin D production in low UV environments led to the selection of lighter skin tones among Neanderthals long before modern humans even arrived. It's critical to understand that skin, eye, and hair color are polygenic traits, meaning they are influenced by more than one gene. The impact of Neanderthal genes must be considered in the context of natural selection, adaptation, and the blending of various genetic contributions over millennia. For example, the admixture of Neanderthal genes with those of early modern humans may have helped populations adapt to Europe's lower levels of sunlight, by influencing traits like skin color. Human eye color is primarily determined by the interaction of several genes, the most important of which are OCA2 and HERC2. Neanderthals, like early modern humans, are thought to have had a wide range of eye colors, including lighter shades like blue and green. When a genetic trait becomes common in a population, and when it first evolved, takes many, many generations. This specific gene was prevalent in the Caucasus region at the time and spread westward into Europe around 20,000 years ago, becoming common around 10,000 years ago. For example, according to a recent study, another Neanderthal haplotype encompassing the OCA2 gene found at high frequency in East Asians and Europeans suggests that Neanderthal DNA played a major role in the depigmentation of early Homo sapiens in Eurasia. If Neanderthals had only dark pigmentation, why would modern humans have inherited light skin-related alleles from them? The reality is that Neanderthals had a range of pigmentation, just as modern Europeans do today, and had light skin adapted for northern climates. Indeed, contrary to popular media portrayal, Neanderthals exhibited variation in genes related to hair, skin, and eye pigmentation. Furthermore, some of that variation has been passed down to modern human populations, with different variants being more or less common in different populations. Interestingly, more of the introgressed variants are actually associated with lighter pigmentation than darker pigmentation. Lighter pigmentation makes perfect sense for them, just as it does for modern humans in northern climates. Surprisingly, evidence suggests that up to 16 different genes may be responsible for human eye color, but the main two genes associated with eye color variation are OCA2 and HERC2, both of which are located on chromosome 15. Specifically, a Neanderthal introgressed allele associated with blue iris pigmentation and blonde and red hair color was under selection in modern human populations. Today, we know of over 100 variants linked to pigmentation variation in living humans. Fewer than 10 of these are known for Neanderthals, and this limited current knowledge may not reflect the full picture of Neanderthal diversity. Nonetheless, two Neanderthal introgressed haplotypes involved in pigmentation are now very common in European populations, clearly indicating a history of natural selection. Accepting that Neanderthals had blue eyes, red or blonde hair, and light skin fundamentally challenges the notion that these traits emerged only after modern humans arrived in Europe. It strongly suggests that some aspects of European identity are rooted in a deeper indigenous ancestry going back hundreds of thousands of years, rather than being purely a product of later migration. One of these haplotypes includes the gene OCA2, which is known to have several variants in living people that affect skin and eye pigmentation. It is most commonly cited as a genetic link to blue versus brown eyes. This Neanderthal haplotype, which spans OCA2, is an excellent example of how difficult it can be to determine the precise functional significance of introgressed haplotypes. This haplotype contains no coding variants, so if there are functional differences between this haplotype and others, they must be due to gene regulation rather than direct changes in the genetic structure. The Neanderthal haplotype contains dozens of gene variants, but only one variant was identified in previous pigmentation studies. This variant has a statistically significant but small effect on eye and hair color in European ancestry samples. However, because it doesn't strongly predict eye or skin pigmentation, it's unclear whether another linked variant is actually responsible for the association with pigmentation. Thus, the findings strongly support the hypothesis of recurrent positive selection acting on multiple variants of OCA2, some of which evolved in modern humans and others inherited through hybridization with Neanderthals. Genome-wide studies and gene variant analyses have been absolutely critical in determining which Neanderthal gene variants are still present in modern human populations. For example, gene variants associated with Neanderthal introgression have been directly linked to skin pigmentation traits, allowing us to better understand how these ancient genes influence the appearance of modern Europeans. In fact, the misconception that Neanderthals had exclusively dark or brown pigmentation is directly contradicted by multiple genetic analyses. The MC1R gene, which regulates pigmentation in hair and skin, has Neanderthal variants that directly lead to red and blonde hair in modern humans. Research on Neanderthal DNA has identified alleles associated with red hair in some specimens, strongly suggesting that at least some Neanderthals had lighter hair. Neanderthal DNA studies have also revealed other variants in genes associated with skin pigmentation that may have been passed down to modern Europeans. MC1R is an important gene that plays a role in melanin production. Some Neanderthal MC1R gene variants appear to have influenced differences in skin tone among modern humans, favoring lighter skin. However, the precise impact is still unknown because modern European skin color is also influenced by natural selection and the complex interactions of multiple genetic factors over time. Indeed, variants associated with hair color in genes such as MC1R and TYRP1 suggest Neanderthal admixture. Alleles responsible for red hair and lighter hair have been linked to Neanderthal gene flow. The presence of these alleles in some modern human populations strongly suggests that these ancient interactions provided the genetic basis for lighter and more diverse hair color in Europe, as well as an increased likelihood of body hair. According to yet another study, the Neanderthal-derived variant of the BNC2 gene on chromosome 9 is strongly linked to lighter skin pigmentation, freckling, and reduced tanning ability in Europeans. Approximately 70% of Europeans possess the Neanderthal variant of the BNC2 gene. This gene is believed to modulate the expression of other pigmentation-related genes, including TYR on chromosome 11, which is crucial for melanin synthesis. The evidence is absolutely clear. Genetic research has shown that Neanderthals carried alleles for blue eyes, red and blonde hair, and lighter skin, all of which were passed on to modern human populations. The persistence of myths about Neanderthal pigmentation is simply not based on science, but rather on a broader attempt to control historical narratives and reinforce specific models of human evolution. But why this misleading information about Neanderthal pigmentation studies?